100 times the value.
Any further questions? As chair, I think I can ask a question. I would ask
Sure.
the question, would you not agree that on lines 26, 29, and 30, that those provisions then are protections in case there is any structure on the property which would have been condemned, was a derelict building under the code, or has been declared to be blighted under the code, so that there is that protection that any structure would have to
Right.
meet those.
There are two, if you think about it, there are two slices in this statute. There's a very, very minimal value slice, presently $5,000 or less. This would increase it to 10, in which you don't have all of those additional characteristics. Then there's a slightly larger slice, and you're right, those apply to the slightly larger slice. I have to tell you, I of course handled the legislation when this was first passed. I thought it would never be used, and in fact, it's been extraordinarily helpful, especially in rural areas.
Any further questions? We operate on motion.
Move to report.
Is there a second? All those in favor, please indicate on the electronic voting board.
He's lurking around the corner.
Delegate Sullivan, I have to be quorum on the other side of the chair for the next bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the third bill that comes at the request of the Treasurers Association. And this clarifies that the treasurer may, for the purpose of collecting, certain other taxes, and the language is other amounts, charges, and fees due to the locality, has the ability to summons taxpayers to answer certain questions with respect to their liability and to their ability to pay.
Mr. Chairman,
Any questions? Well, just one second.
I'm sorry, excuse me.
Any questions from the members of the committee for the patron? Hearing none. Any members of the public want to speak in favor of this bill or explain it?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Alan Albert, on behalf of the Treasurers Association. This is also, comes at the request of the association. The language tax has been, the question has been raised whether the treasurer may ask questions about something that is not technically a tax. So for instance, if you have somebody who has a $10,000 delinquent water charge or an airport tie-down fee or any of these other things, we've made this same change in multiple places throughout the code over the years. We apparently missed this one along the way. So that's the purpose here. This is a power that is very, very rarely used, but it takes its usefulness from the fact that the treasurer can use it when necessary and can. Ron Williams is here, one of the longest serving treasurers in the state. Ron tells me that he has used it exactly 0 times. But the fact that he could use it and explain this to the taxpayer always produced compliance. So that's what this statute really does in practice.
Move to report. Delegate Carter, you have a question?
Yes, I have a question for the patron or for the witness and member.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, my question on this bill, so we're expanding from due taxes to other amounts, charges, or fees. So, it would strike me that this could apply to something as simple as, say, a $20 parking fee. And the penalty for non-compliance would be a Class 4 misdemeanor each day that the person refuses to come in and answer questions about that fee. So I'm concerned that someone who maybe can't take off work would be accruing $250 worth of additional fees for each day that they can't take off work to come in and answer the treasurer's questions on a $20 charge. I'm wondering if either the patron or someone from the Treasurers Association would be able to speak to that possibility.
Yes, sir. Ron Williams, I'm treasurer of the city of Suffolk, and as Alan said, in 38 years in office, I've never used this particular code section. we put the language in all the notices that we send out to advise taxpayers that we do have that power and could use it. I've never had to use it. We've talked about it, you know, in discussions, but it's so remote. All we're really trying to do is recognize the fact that treasurers in today's environment are trying to collect every penny that's due to the localities. It takes pressure off of the state, so that we don't have to come and ask for money from the state all the time, trying to collect the revenues that are due to the locality. And it comes in every form, as Alan said, whatever is due to a department in the city, send it to the treasurer and we will attempt to collect it. And we're just trying to make sure that our powers that we have to collect taxes can be applied to these other revenues, which are equally as important to the operation of the city. So it just evens the playing field all the way across. We're not asking for any additional power. The code section that you quoted about the misdemeanor has been in there for probably 40 years or 50 years. We didn't change that. We are not asking for anything additionally there. But to collect all the revenue, including library fines and fees and cafeteria fees for the schools, all of these revenues that are due to the localities that are vital for the operation of that respective area of the locality are critical. This simply would give us the opportunity to bring somebody in and talk about. I don't think it's used very much.
Kevin's got a comment too.
Yes, sir?
Kevin?
Kevin Hutchins, treasurer for Roanoke County. 16 years, used it one time. We used it to call in about 4 cases. All of these are cases that are very hard to get hold of. We're talking about tax amounts that were in excess of $7,000 apiece. We're trying to get them in to get a resolution to determine what is going on with them financially so we can get to the actual billing and collection part of the case. It would be a waste of time for me to use it for anybody that was a relatively small amount. And speaking to library fines, typically speaking, if somebody is really in arrears, it goes through the county attorney first and comes to me. We're talking about somebody that may owe $1,000 in fines before it gets to me to take some kind of action. I can't foresee us having enough that I would use that in that situation, but it would not be for somebody for just a small amount.
Delegate Rock, did you make a motion, or did you have something else you wanted to add?
I did, if I could. My name is
Briefly?
Very briefly, Jeffrey Sharf. I'm with Taxing Authority Consulting Services. We're a law firm. We represent a lot of treasurers. We have used this tool. It is primarily to collect large amounts and would be looked at to collect large amounts like solid waste violations, derelict buildings. It's not worth it for a treasurer to go after a $20 parking ticket by doing a summons. And on the penalty side, it is a judicial component. A court would have to come forward and say someone's liable. Usually the practice has not been a criminal prosecution, but a show cause, again, before the court, just for someone to come and say why they haven't been responsive.
Second the motion.
Motion to move forward, properly made and seconded.
Mr. Chairman. Speaking to the
Speaking
motion.
Yes, sir.
Speaking to the motion, Mr. Chairman, it sounds, you know, listening to the folks from the Treasurers Association, it sounds as though this, the section of the code as it's already written is serving its intended purpose where, you know, they're using it only rarely to go after excessively large amounts owed. And I would be very, very concerned about expanding this power, especially given the fact that, you know, we heard from one of the folks from the Treasurers Association that this language would make it possible for a treasurer to slap someone with a Class 4 misdemeanor over school lunch day. You know, if it's currently already being rarely used, and the treasurers are not necessarily under any pressure to use it anymore, I would be very, very hesitant to expand that power because while all current treasurers may be using this judiciously, updating the language in the code doesn't just apply to current treasurers. We have to think about who might be elected to that position in the future. So I would urge the members of the subcommittee to reject this bill.
Further discussion?
Mr. Chair, speaking of the vote, I confess I share the same reticence that Delegate Carter does. but also understand the need to pull in these other fees under the treasurer's umbrella. If there were some way for us to move this to the full committee and some protection against Delegate Carter's concern could be incorporated between now and then, my concern would be addressed.
There's always an opportunity for full committee
Right.
to address,
So I would-
further address a bill.
Yeah, so it was mostly a comment to the patron, if there was some way for him to think about that between now and then.
Motion to report has been properly made and seconded. Clerk will please open the rolls. Members vote on the electronic voting apparatus. Motion to report carries 8-2. Thank you, Delegate Harris.
Thank you, Chairman Sullivan. All right, moving back to regular order here, Delegate Weber, 947.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, in committee, House Bill 947 is basically, I guess, kind of a cleanup or an addition to legislation that was carried in 2017 that when we created the green development zones for the counties that became part of then Governor McAuliffe's energy coalition or whatever. And so what the bill now does, or what the bill does to the green technology zones, is it adds two things. One, it kind of defines green technologies, but then it also adds on lines 36 and 37, it says to business located in a green development zone that will adopt green technologies. And part of that is as the county passed, as Fauquier County passed an ordinance, they created a green development zone. Some of the businesses in that area want to take advantage of some of those advantages that the green development zone offer and upgrade their buildings and upgrade their businesses to be more green and friendly, and the county would like the opportunity to be able to do that. So the bill was requested by the Economic Development Director in Fauquier County, and the intent of this legislation is to promote the corporate efforts in being environmentally friendly.
Thank you, Delegate Weber. Questions for the patron?
I loved this bill when you first passed it. I was only jealous that I hadn't thought of it. It's a good bill.
There's a motion for Delegate Weber. You should chair, Madam Chair.
However, as much as I love it in concept, I am concerned as I look at the bill about the tightness of the language as far as LEED buildings and true investment versus added insulation. It is very, very open, and I am very concerned about the way in which it might be administered as far as people with a degree of sophistication getting some tax credits, others who aren't. This bill needs, from my, now I guess I'm not sure what I'm doing, but I'm speaking to the bill. My concerns is how loose you have it. An ideal goal, but very loose in application.
Okay. If I may, Mr. Chairman, the idea is to ensure that as corporations that are in the zone take their buildings up to the next level, to the LEED compliance, to the compliance that the green development zone seeks to accomplish, and so that the county can then verify and award those the various awards that the green development zone undertakes, because the way it works is they will invest in the building and the technology to make the rainwater harvesting, et cetera, to make their building much more energy efficient, and then the county in the green development zone agrees to undergo not collecting or taxes for a few years or whatever they've developed in their ordinance, and then that way the expensive part of making their business green is pushed on a little bit further down the line so that the business can absorb some of those costs.
Follow-up question. Is this tax advantage got any kind of a sunset on it so that honest effort is rewarded for a couple of years but not the continued if they don't continue to progress, they don't get rewarded for just a minor step?
Mr. Chairman, I would answer. The way that is developed is through the county ordinance in accordance with the tax code, with the green development zone language that we passed in 2017. This language was also derived from many of the other economic zones that we have, the technology zones. So I would have to go through the old the old language, but I would say yes, because as a supervisor, et cetera, you wouldn't want to have that tax liability out there for 20, 30 years. You want to be able to take advantage of it over 5 to 10, and then start collecting taxes.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, but I really remain very concerned that without that definition in there by the state about how this is to be administered, that just by doing it by ordinance, I'm afraid, is really wide open.
So, if I may, Mr. Chairman? Sure. Line 38, Section C, the tax incentives may be provided up to 10 years and may include but not limited to reduction of affirmative fees, reduction of user fees, reduction of any type of gross receipts tax, the extent duration of incentive proposals shall conform to the United States Constitution and Constitution of Virginia. So they are limited to 10 years.
Mr. Chairman, where it's appropriate, I'd like to make an amendment that we change 10 to 5.
Other questions for the patron? Delegate Warren.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I may, Delegate Robert, my concern, kind of following up on Chairman Watts, green technologies, your definition there is incredibly broad in so much as a business that puts in storm windows, vinyl siding that has a 1/4-inch insulation on the back, other insulating materials, blow-in insulation, we now are all saying are green technologies. And businesses that are located in a green development zone would now be permitted certain tax relief, other fees, things of that nature, for very minimal energy improvements, shall we say. The other concern is kind of follow-up. I suspect many of these entities would be eligible for potential federal tax benefits for these energy improvements, as we as private citizens are, I believe businesses are similarly entitled. Dr. McNamara wouldn't be so saying no. Maybe not.
I'm not sure.
Okay. And my concern would be kind of the double dip effect, shall we say, where, so those are just some concerns. Don't oppose the concept, but as I read the language, as Chairman Watts alluded to, it's very broad in its potential implications.
Would that be, Mr. Chairman, may I ask?
Sure.
Would that be in the definition of green technologies?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, if I may ask? Would there be a way to tighten that? So the goal of the legislation is to have the current businesses that are in the zone be able to upgrade their business and take advantage of the ordinance that Buck has put forward, so that they could bring their buildings up to LEED standard, essentially. That makes sense.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may.
And allow, if I may, real quick, allow the green mark or partisan, which can be very expensive to implement.
And if it were such a combination of these technologies that got them to that standard, I would have greater comfort. But we don't tie it to that standard, so we're saying if they just put in storm windows, boom. If we put in language to dictate, I think this may address Chairman Watt's concern, where once they've achieved that standard, then the ordinance would capture them some relief and so forth.
Doug Carter.
Mr. Chairman, speaking to Delegate Orick's point, I believe that the current language would actually allow them to, the language of current law may actually allow them to take advantage of those tax incentives once they've reached LEED certification, because in section B here, it says each locality may grant tax incentives and provide certain regulatory flexibility to green development businesses located in the green development zone, or to businesses operating in an energy efficient building located in the green development zone. So once they reach that standard, then they would qualify under that second qualification there. So if the intent of the bill is to provide tax incentives for them once they reach that LEED certification standard, I don't believe the bill would be necessary. But I do share the delegate's concern about it being overly broad, especially since the proposed new language at the end of section B doesn't state that if they qualify under this new qualification, that the incentives would have to be commensurate with the work that's done. So, Delegate Orick, I believe, is completely correct. They could replace one window with a more energy efficient one and say, we've adopted a green technology, and then qualify for potentially millions of dollars worth of tax incentives for a single window. So I have serious concerns about the language that's being proposed here.
Did Doug solve?
I have a different view of it, Mr. Chairman. What we're doing is granting localities options. And by the way, putting storm windows in is a really good idea that localities ought to incentivize. The localities will be able to say, under this law, all you do is storm windows, you get this tax incentive. If you do more of that, you get this tax incentive. I don't think in Richmond, this bill would say, if you put one storm window in, you must get some tax incentive. That is not what this says. We're simply letting the localities develop a framework for doing this. It gives them flexibility. I'm fine with Madam Chair's proposed reduction of 5 years, but I would hope we would support this bill.
If I may inquire for the patron, would you like to take the bye for the day? Let it work on it just a little bit.
That would be the chairman's prerogative, absolutely.
It's up to you. All right. Again, I think it's certainly got some merits, and if Delegate Sullivan is jealous of it, then it's certainly got something going for it. But it seems to me that it's not quite baked. I think we have a week, so if that would be
We do have a
acceptable.
week. Yeah. Right. We'll be prepared to live and die next week then.
All right, is there a motion to
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So moved.
All right. Second. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
I thank the committee.
All right, the bill is filed for the week. And also, 623 Delegate Plum's bill, I don't have any communications from him. I would take a motion to get by for the day.
Second.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, ma'am.
I file a Basker bill.
Yes, of
Hi,
course.
how are you?
Secretary, how are you? Good to see you back there.
Good
How are
to see
you?
you, Delegate.
Yeah.
And members of the subcommittee. I am speaking on behalf of the bill for Delegate Plum. This was switched from one committee to the subcommittee.
Okay.
And so he is the conflict. So I'm his avatar today. I
Jeff, mind if I depart to another meeting?
Thank you, Delegate Hudson.
Yeah, I am speaking as a trustee of the Virginia Outdoors Foundation. This bill would increase the deed recordation fee from $1 to $3. Virginia Outdoors Foundation is a leader in land conservation in Virginia. We've conserved over 850,000 acres. We're in our, excuse me. We are asking for this increase in funds so that we can increase our programming, as we have programmed in 93 out of the 95 counties. We are behind in our programming in our urban areas. Our board retreat last year asked us to extend our programming in more than just our rural areas, so we're trying to target our urban areas. While our portfolio with respect to the areas we've addressed has significantly more than doubled since 2004, our fees to support our programming has not. In addition, our database and our technology that we're using to support our programs is more than 20 years old. So we cannot address the programs that we need to address. We cannot efficiently expand our reach throughout the Commonwealth. We are asking for this fee increase. We have with us today the executive director of our foundation to answer any questions.
Right, I would note peremptorily that it is somewhat extraordinary for an individual other than the patron to offer a bill, but I would note that both the chair and the ranking member believe it's in order under the circumstances, the limited circumstances today. So with that, we will proceed.
And Mr. Chairman, and the historical precedent has been, in the event the bill is not viewed favorably, then we would potentially allow the patron to come back at a later time before negative action was taken.
Thank you.
And may I say, just again, last week it was switched over quickly, and so that's
A lot of that
the
going around,
conflict.
Madam Secretary.
Thanks.
All right. And speak in favor of the bill?
Britt Lemp from our foundation, she's our executive director.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. As Viola said, we have increased our holdings, our portfolio by 65% since the fee was first established in 2004. And we're looking to close that gap. And that this fee, this increase in that fee would do that, would modernize it. I would also point out it's the lowest of all the recordation fees. It's been in place for 15 years, and we really need an update in order to account for our tremendous growth that we've had over the last 15 years. If there are any questions of the committee, I'd be happy to take them. I know we're short on time, so I'll skip my soliloquy here.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I may, in addition to the increase from $1 to $3, what's the effect of striking the word deed and adding now any writing document or instrument?
There's
What
a
does that expand it to?
there's a substitute. Is the substitute available? And
If the substitute is available, do we need Delegate Plum to move the substitute or
I'll
member
move
of
the
the committee?
substitute.
thank you. No.
Very much like to read the substitute.
That's what.
The substitute picks up a cross-reference, and it aligns the phraseology with other words in the code, so it makes it uniform. Delegate Orrock, to your question about that change, there was a budget amendment about 2 years ago that put in clarifying language about the application of the fee. There was uneven administration of the fee. Certain clerks were not picking up the deeds of trust, deeds of leases. So Governor McAuliffe's office put the budget amendment in so that there would be uniform, even application, and this bill would codify that. We're good with the clerks. They have no position. They just want to have clear instructions. So this bill would codify that change is currently in the budget, and then the substantive change would be the increase from $1 to $3.
David Carter?
Mr. Chairman, that addressed my question.
All right, thank you. Is there a motion on the substitute?
So moved.
All right, the motion is to adopt the substitute. All in favor, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, any opposed? All right, substitute is adopted. Any further questions on the bill as in this?
I will stand by if there are any further questions of the committee members.
All right, hearing none. Anyone wishing to speak in favor of the bill as substitute? Boy, she's quick.
Very briefly, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Nikki Rodner with the Nature Conservancy, we support this bill. Just want to highlight two of the things that were said. BOF's workload has increased tremendously. That's one reason this is needed. The other reason this is needed is because of the expansion of the work into urban areas, and these two women have been leaders in that area. It's something that our organization is trying to figure out at the same time, and so we really appreciate their leadership, so we hope you will support this bill.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Elizabeth Rafferty here on behalf of Piedmont Environmental Council, and for the points already stated, we support this bill as well.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone opposed? All right. Is there then a motion on the bill as substitute?
Move the report.
Second.
All right, the motion is to report with substitute. And close the roll, the bill
I
report.
can vote
You can
since
vote
it's
on
in
that.
this.
All right, hold the roll. Okay.
I did vote. We are voting.
All
Please
right.
record me as.
All right, let's cast our votes again.
Charles, you want to vote?
All right. Yep. All right. And the bill report's 6-4. I think that's the end of our business today. Thank you all, and the committee rises.
Have a cookie. Joe Braun.